Good afternoon, everyone. I am Juliana Mosley Williams, also known as Dr. J on campus, and I welcome you to this spring's first DEI Speaks event featuring Dr. David Marquez. And so I want to make sure that people do remember, yes, this technically was slotted as a lunch and learn. So if you are eating, that is completely fine. And if you choose to turn your camera off because you're eating, or if you're eating on screen, nobody cares, it's fine. We knew what this was when we set this up. I also want to make sure that the reminder is out there. This session is being recorded and will be available later via our YouTube channel. The next thing is the DEI Speaks program, speaker series basically, it was created with the intention, of course, of bringing notable speakers around various topics having to do with culture that tries to help us build a more inclusive community campus, does some information, also is a way of being able to celebrate culture. And so I hope that you will find the series one that you will continue to come back for. We had our first speaker in the fall, and today is our second session. Also want to acknowledge the DEI committee. First of all, Dr. Middleman, our president, who is in the space. He already took a moment to speak directly with our speaker and to thank him for coming. And so we thank you, Dr. Middleman, for your leadership. And always trying to be supportive of these efforts. I also want to, oh, there he is, he's waving and he's eating. Do you want to say a few words, Dr. Middleman?
Again, I just want to thank David for taking the time to speak with us. And it's always great to see us together having these discussions. I think it's really central to what we believe here at Salus, but also it's important that we all get a little bit more educated on DEI and the issues surrounding that if we're going to really walk the talk. So again, thank you all, and I look forward to the discussion.
And to the rest of the DEI committee, thank you so much for being here and for the work that you have been doing along with me for the past, oh gosh, I guess we're at maybe 7 or 8 months now. One of our members in particular, Dr. Jim Konopak, also known as Dr. K, is the reason why our guest speaker is with us today. So I'm sure in the introduction, he'll share more about their story, but that just goes to show that it's not about me, that when recommendations are made, whether it's from the committee or from anyone else in our community, we are willing to explore those opportunities for speakers and programs of the like. And let's see, I think that's it for that part. Finally, this program is sponsored by the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and also our, I believe, newest student organization, White Coats for Black Lives. And they came about last spring. And they have been doing some really great work already. And so the president, Mariah Sandy, is going to tell us a little bit about the organization.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Mariah Sandy, and I'm the president of White Coats for Black Lives here at Salus, where our mission is to dismantle racism and cultivate collective liberation in healthcare for Black and Brown patients. So we are very honored to co-sponsor today's event, as we saw it as a wonderful opportunity to stand in solidarity with our Afro-Latino as well as Latinx patients who experience similar medical disparities. So now we will hear from Dr. Konopak, who will introduce today's speaker.
Well, thanks so much, Mariah. Thanks, Juliana, and thanks everyone for coming to today's talk. It really is my sincere honor to introduce you to today's DEI speaker, Dr. David Marquez. Dave is a professor of kinesiology and nutrition at the University of Illinois in Chicago and has a long-standing joint appointment with the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. He's helped write the physical activity guidelines for Americans, was just recently elected to the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. He's a member of several editorial boards and a fellow of the National Academy of Kinesiology, the Society of Behavioral Medicine, the Gerontological Society of America, and the American College of Sports Medicine. His research has been funded by several large-scale federal grants, including multiple R01s from the NIH, which have helped him to train and mentor outstanding PhD students with scholarly passions similar to his own. And you'll hear a little bit more about them and their work with Dave in his talk. In addition to publishing book chapters and reports, Dr. Marquez has published well over 100 manuscripts in journals such as Preventive Medicine, The Gerontologist, Neuroepidemiology, and JAMA. And he has a list of conference presentations that was frankly too long for me to count. Dave has also been a dear friend of mine for nearly 20 years and is really one of the gentlest souls you'll ever meet, with the exception being when the Illinois basketball team is losing, that you don't want to see that. Anyway, without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce my friend and our speaker for today, Dr. David Marquez. Dave?
Thank you so much. Actually, it gets me choked up to hear not so much about these things that I've been fortunate and privileged to be a part of, but just thinking about over the years the teams that I have been a part of with phenomenal leadership and teams that I've been fortunate enough to lead. So I am extremely grateful to be able to talk with you today. Thank you to Dr. Middleman, to Dr. J, and to Dr. Konopak and the DEI committee for inviting me to Salus University. Honestly, I'm very happy to be here and excited to talk about the work that I have been a part of and that I have led. So we can go ahead and get into it. I welcome questions along the way. I will not be able to see if you have questions, so I know that people are monitoring the chat. But feel free to put it into the chat, or somebody can go ahead and interrupt me. If I can answer the question when I'm in the moment, it might be more relevant to you. If you prefer to wait till the end, that's fine as well. En español, mi nombre es David Javier Marquez, but most people find it easier to just call me David or Dave Marquez. And I'm very fortunate to be at a Hispanic serving institution, UIC, also ANAPISI, the Asian serving institution. And so we are an urban institution in Chicago. I don't have any conflicts to disclose. Here's a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So some background information about the Latino population in the United States, some cultural values, and I'll say more about that. And then different studies that we have had in my lab or research team that have really illustrated how important these cultural values are to the health and lives of Latinos. It was great. I heard the term Latinx earlier, and you might be familiar with it, you might not. There's a lot of discussion, debate about using an X. Sometimes usually it's in place of Latino or Latina, right? Ending in an O or an A. So basically the Spanish language is gendered. If there are 99 Latina women in a room and they are referred to as Latinas, a group of Latinas or Latina women. If one male joins, 99 and 1, now the group is Latinos because there's a mix, and so it goes with the male term. Latinx is a more universal term. It's meant to be a more inclusive term. It's used as a gender neutral or non-binary alternative. You will notice in this talk that I will be using Latino or Latina instead of Latinx, mostly for the reason that older people who identify with the group in general don't know about the X, don't know about Latinx, and would not refer to themselves in that way. So I go with the way in which they refer to themselves in Chicago, which is Latino or Latina. And really, that's what I think we should do, right? What do people prefer to be called by, to be referred to as? And let's go with that term. Over the years, Latinos have become the largest ethnic or racial minority group in the United States. You see this like almost linear trend here over the years from 2010 to 2019. Back when Dr. Konopak and I were in graduate school and I would give presentations on the population, the US Census Bureau was reporting like 12% of the US population being Latino. So it is a large and growing segment of the population. And I do a lot of work with older Latinos. You've probably heard about, what's been called like the graying of America, that there's a huge demographic shift these days to having many more older adults in the US than in the past. And this is true, right? If you look at census data from 2000 to 2009, in terms of the number of older non-Latino whites, a 10% increase, which is huge when you think about that absolute number of people in older non-Latino whites 65 and older. Over that same time period, if you look at the percentage increase in older Latinos, was a 59% increase. So of course the absolute number is larger here, but the relative increase is much, much greater in older Latinos. If you look at more recent data, back in 2017, Latinos were 8% of all older adults. That's projected to be 21% of older adults by 2060. So this has societal impacts, healthcare impacts, and in my case, well, besides the personal, is the research impacts. This I could go on for days about the lack of inclusion of Latinos in research. And so my line is always, people are there. It's on us as researchers and investigative teams to create welcoming environments such that people will want to participate in our research. And you see that number 2060, the projection is in the US, 21% of older Latinos will identify, 21% of older adults will identify as Latinos. There is a tremendous number of Latinos who will have Alzheimer's disease in the future. So these were projections. If you just really focus on the red line, that's the total number. These are a breakdown by the oldest old, mid old, and youngest old. But if you look at this red line from 2010 up through 2060, the number of Latinos in the US with Alzheimer's disease is projected to increase by 832%. I mean, it's just like mind blowing. It's hard to even wrap your mind around what that means in terms of the number of people. My father passed away from Alzheimer's about a year and a half ago. I did the work professionally. I've also experienced it through my dad personally. And in general, it is just it's a horrific disease that often takes away who people are. You might have a connection with Alzheimer's. If you don't now, unfortunately, you probably will in the near future because it is really, really increasing in its prevalence, and especially amongst Latinos. So again, situations that are created in our society that I'm not really sure that we're ready to address. So I've been talking about it, in working with Latinos. Well, who are Latinos? Who is Hispanic? That's another talk. It could be a whole nother talk in and of itself. What do people identify as, right? So usually it's from like a home country, a cultural heritage. Like I'm personally Mexican American, right? Through my father. But I also refer to myself as Latino. If somebody said I was Hispanic, because I know where that term comes from, I don't prefer it, but I say, yeah, that fits me. When we are working with the Latinx population or really any new group, we know it's best to learn about individuals, an individual's background and situation and go from there, right? We have a greater appreciation of differences sometimes between us, but also maybe similarities that we have with people. So we have to be careful not to stereotype people. So this is like a caveat slide for me, getting to cultural values. It does help to have like a technical knowledge about groups because it gives us a framework. The more we understand individuals and we can develop cultural sensitivity by learning about that person's experience. Maybe, for example, amongst Latinos, it might be an immigration experience. We're better able to appreciate where people are, where they have been, and maybe where they're going. So the shared values that I'm going to talk about are important, but keep in mind that there's other factors that influence your work. So I'm going to briefly highlight 5 shared cultural beliefs or values that tend to be highly prevalent amongst Latinos. I'm not saying they are exclusive to Latinos. You might say, wow, I see a lot of this in some of my identities. Excellent, right? It's not exclusive to Latinos, but tends to be highly prevalent. It's also not that every single Latino has these beliefs. That said, familismo or familism is really tends to be really strong. This identification and attachment, feelings of loyalty, reciprocity, and solidarity among members of the same family. When something good happens, let's celebrate it. When somebody's ill, sick, that really goes up the priority list. Stop what you're doing, maybe even in terms of a job, and tend to the person in need. Personalismo, personalism, an emphasis on politeness and courtesy, gaining trust and respect, and creating a rapport with an individual. That personal connection having great importance before just jumping into business. I do community research in a lot of what I do. And I was born in the United States, and I tend to have this, like, you know, unfortunately, like business, but like, okay, I've got stuff I got to get done, next meeting. And that's not the way in general Latinos are going to work, right? If I set up a meeting with a community member, with a community organization, I don't know how long it's going to last, right? We're going to talk first, and then we will get into the business. And as a provider, as you have patients, especially immigrants, maybe older Latino patients, they might not be used to, wait, we only have 10 minutes. Wait, we only have 15 minutes together. How are you going to get to know who I am, not just my health status? Machismo is present. Many people know what machismo is. There are many negative connotations with machismo, but there are also some more positive, that it's an attempt to be caring and responsible, and a bit of a protector. People have heard of machismo, but not necessarily kind of like the flip being Marianismo. Nurturing women, carrying the responsibility of caring for others. It's not just the family, not just the nuclear family, the extended family. Sometimes it's friends, the church. And in the US, many Latina women will struggle with this because of cultural expectations of how they are viewed as supposed to be behaving. But that's not always in line with creating your own independence, which tends to be a common value in the United States. So this can carry guilt for many women, right? I'm not your perfect Mexican daughter, is a very popular book. So this comes into play. And then the last one I'll mention is fatalism or fatalismo. My health is really not under my control, right? It's God's will. If I'm meant to get diabetes, then I'm going to get diabetes. If I'm meant to get Alzheimer's disease, then I'm going to get Alzheimer's disease, right? So these are some shared beliefs. And then you're like, okay, that's great, but you're not a sociologist, so why are you talking about these things? These things matter in the lives and specifically the exercise behavior of Latinos, and many times older Latinos. So these are from the documented peer-reviewed literature. And I've kind of split them up. I tend to think of them as having cultural reasons, say, for Latinos, and the second half more, I call them circumstantial correlates or factors, influencers for Latinos. I don't really have time to exercise because, you know, I work a couple jobs to make money for my family, and then I'm just tired and I don't have time. Or the importance of the family's needs coming before a women's own needs. So it's not just women, but it's around these typical gender roles. I don't have this free time that you're talking about. I'm always busy. I'm always responsible for somebody else or to somebody else, and I just don't have this free time. So you can see where these, like, you know, familismo, marianismo, maybe machismo cultural values come into play with everyday behaviors, and also a lack of experience with traditional exercise. If I say to, you know, somebody from the neighborhood, say a 75-year-old woman who's from Mexico, and I say, oh, this physical activity stuff, it's easy, right? Like, just go get on a treadmill, walk for, you know, half hour a day most days of the week, and you'll get the health benefits. And you might get the side eye or the stink eye of, like, why would I want to get on a machine? Like, wait, so I'm going to get on this thing and I'm going to walk, but I don't actually go anywhere. And, you know, just unfamiliarity, not having experience with traditional exercise as we know it. These other ones are really strong barriers. It's not because people are Latino, though. I mean, it's not rooted in being Latino. It tends to be with the way society has been structured and where many Latinos live, for example, and jobs that are available, right? So the safety concerns. If you live in an area of higher crime, you're unlikely to go outside for personal safety. I do work on the southeast side of the city, where older people, older Latinos have said, after it gets dark, I don't go outside. Okay, so in some climates that might be okay. In Chicago, maybe it's like, you know, in East Coast, Philadelphia, it's like 4 p.m. in the winter. So like from 4 p.m. on, you won't go outside because you have concerns. Okay, so there are a lot of things that get in the way of older Latinos who want to be physically active. So we all have our own ideas, and then reviews have come out of existing physical activity interventions, and some suggestions have included it should have social support. Make sure the activity is culturally relevant. If it can be low cost, that's good, because there are many Latinos who have lower income, and the income that can be available for things like exercising or a gym or something like that. And overall, a need for more culturally appropriate interventions. And so I have done a good amount of work on dance, Latin dance, as a form of physical activity for older Latinos. If you identify as Latino or you know about Latin culture, you know there's nothing new or innovative about dancing. However, back 10, 15 years ago, there was very, very little scientific study of dancing and how it can influence health. Okay, so while you might not think of it as novel or innovative, NIH reviewers, thankfully, have seen it as innovative because there's not a lot of science behind the benefits of dance. So this is where my ideas were. The really interesting point here might be as well, Dr. Konopak can attest to this. I'm a terrible dancer. I really don't enjoy dancing. It's probably cyclical, like you're not very good at something, so you don't really enjoy it. And I really enjoy traditional exercise, but I understand many people don't. And we want people to move more and sit less. And if we tell them you have to be on a treadmill, you have to do these forms of activities, that doesn't work, right? That's not going to get people to adopt the behavior. So great, how about older Latinos dancing? So as I went in to do this research in Chicago and the neighboring suburbs, it's like, hold up, who's gonna trust me, right? So I'm from Chicago, the north side of the city. I live in the suburbs now. Well, I don't like, there are many Latinos all over the city. And so I'm not from those neighborhoods. So I'm an outsider coming in. Most people, they don't know that I'm of Mexican descent when they look at me. And like I said, I mentioned I'm a non-dancer. They aren't going to say like, okay, well, show me what you know. No, thankfully, no dance demonstrations happen. So part of the research was getting out into communities, Latin communities in the Chicago area, so that people would know who I was and could trust the research I was doing. There's a lot of distrust. You might experience this as a provider. So people are skeptical of healthcare providers. And when it comes to research, I don't want to be a guinea pig in your study, right? Especially those who are not documented, because for fear that their information is going to be reported or that they'll be reported to ICE. So really, if you think about it, why am I going to go volunteer to be in this research study, provide information from myself, when that might put me at greater risk for different things? We know over the past like 6 years or so, the social climate has changed and we have regressed in many ways. And so you will have many Latinos, documented or not, who don't want to provide information. So we need to make it personal and we need to keep it personal. Remember earlier, the cultural value of personalismo. Know who I am before you're interested in anything like business-wise with me. Because honestly, this is the way it often works in academia. It's like the real world exits here, academia, you take a different exit and you don't link up beyond that. I have come to follow the engaged model, which is a form of, it's a model for community interaction. It's from based from my colleagues, Drs. Crystal Glover and Dr. Raj Shah at the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. I won't spend too much time on this, but we really do those first two things first. You network and you give first. You can see the acronym over here. Because if you just go in looking for subjects, trying to get participants for your study, advocating for research, and they don't know who you are or where you're coming from, in most cases, maybe all cases, you're not going to be successful. So you network and you give first. We have done this in the form of different things. Before the pandemic, we did this in terms of giving presentations. We will talk to people about what is Alzheimer's disease? How is it different or related to dementia? How does physical activity influence Alzheimer's disease? If I exercise, will it mean I don't get it? Do it mean I have less of a chance of getting it? So we do these types of outreach. Another way during the pandemic is that we were not able to meet in person, so we did a lot of drive-up activities. So packages of PPE equipment with masks, with hand sanitizer, and easy to read materials on health, or an activity workbook with crossword puzzles in there and some adult coloring, and you give them a set of colored pencils so they can do that. So we do these things first so that we can advocate for research and then go back and give back. So this, we're still working on a paper to get this out into the literature, but I really appreciate where this model is coming from and try to adapt it. So we got, my lab and I got out into the community. We did interviews with Latin dance instructors, not that are part of the university, but are part of the city. And we talked to them about, what do you think about dancing for older adults and that type of thing? And instructors were in favor of it, thought there's no reason why somebody who's older shouldn't be able or should not have the opportunity to dance. We also did focus groups with older Latinos. And what it came down to was when I would ask, would you want to be dancing more? Oh, yeah, you hear these really cool stories and experiences of how when they were younger, they used to go clubbing and family parties, they used to dance. And then I say, well, why don't you do it now? And they say, well, where are we going to go? There's no place for older adults to go dancing, and specifically to be able to do Latin dancing. So I took that as data and the formative work to form the Bailamos dance program. And I always say I co-created the Latin dance program. Miguel Mendez is a professional dance instructor. You can see him here. We co-created the program together. I brought the science, he brought the dance, and we created this program together. Because I mentioned, I don't know a whole lot about dancing. And no offense to Miguel, but before we started working, he didn't know a whole lot about the scientific method and the process. So we teamed up and we created this program with the rationale. If you talk to people about exercising, if they do it, they love talking to you about it. If they're like most people, they don't do it regularly and they're like, oh God, like now you're going to make me feel guilty and all of this. When you talk to people, Latinos, about dancing, so many people, it's the opposite reaction. It's fun. It's social. It's not boring like getting on a treadmill. And scientifically, we could say it challenges people physically, right? You get your heart rate elevated. It takes coordination, which also involves your brain and cognitively needing to remember dance steps, reacting to your partner as your partner is moving. So we created this Bailamos dance program to see, number one, can this get older Latinos to be more physically active? And if so, could it have health benefits? So the program is actually being revised a little bit now, a 4-month program with 4 styles of dance, 1 style for each of 4 months. And we also include monthly discussion sessions where we talk to people about goal setting for physical activity, how they can incorporate physical activity into their daily lives, not just coming to a dance class, but how can you be more physically active on a daily basis? And we work in sessions of open dancing where they're not learning something new, but they can practice what they've learned. In some studies, we've had a control group, which is health education, and that was by University of Illinois Extension, which was a program for older adults and in Spanish. And that's key. In our dance studies, being able to speak Spanish, not read, but being able to speak Spanish is inclusion requirement. Why? If you look at health disparities and health inequities even more, the availability of programs tend to be far less for Spanish speakers than for English speakers. Also, if you look at data, older adults who speak Spanish are at more risk for disability than older Latinos who also speak English. Clearly, it's not the language that's driving it, but what are the other factors amongst older Latinos who speak English? Usually have higher rates of education and income, and those are protective. We know this in the U.S. and also elsewhere. So our people it's geared for low active Latinos who speak Spanish. And recruitment, how do you recruit for a study? Recruitment is not easy, okay? And we don't go to clinics for the most part. I think it might be mentioned there, but that's not primary. In the red, I bring them up because those cultural values, okay? So one example is at a senior center, 4 times a month, like every other Tuesday and every other Thursday, they'd have Herencia Latina, like a Latino club, where most of the people that went to the senior center were Latino and spoke Spanish, but not all. So they would be able to gather and have events and bingo and stuff like that in Spanish so that people could connect, right, and get to know each other. The greatest source has been at Spanish masses at Roman Catholic churches. So the connection between culture and religion amongst Latinos and some people, there's a clear separation. In some people, many older Latinos, you can't separate those two. They actually think of religion as part of the culture. So there are many in Chicago, many Catholic masses that are in Spanish. So I've always said, if you want to be able to have access to a large number of older Latinos, you can go to church, and that's where a lot of people will be. So we would partner with different churches so that we could talk about our study, announce it, and maybe stand at the exits getting signatures so that we could call them with more information. And word of mouth, right? Social people, people who talk to each other, that would work. So I'm going to show you some brief data. I mentioned first we want to increase physical activity, and we want to see if a dance program can influence cognition in some way. So there are many validated neuropsychological tests, both in English and in Spanish, and one is called logical memory, where a person such as Dr. Priscilla Vasquez here, former PhD student who's now faculty in California, you read a story to a person, and then they are asked to recall the story verbatim right away and later, delayed, where there's other tests that go on in the meantime. It is really a challenging test. So a former PhD student, Dr. Guy Balbim, has published this data. There's a citation for me down here, and he looked at some other data with this study. So let me orient you to this somewhat quickly. In the blue are those who were randomized to the health education group. In the red, those who were randomized to the dance group. You have how many items they were able to remember from that study, and this is immediate, before the dance or health education, and afterwards, post-intervention. And you see that in both places. Here, you see the interaction was not quite statistically significant, but it was approaching significance. And to me, this is amazing, not just because it's from my lab, but so there was not a statistical difference in how many items those randomized to the two groups were able to remember before the intervention. And remember, this is delayed recall. You're told the story, you do other tests, you try to recall it verbatim. What you might expect from those in the control group, they basically stayed the same in how many items they could recall after the intervention. But look at the change among those who were in the dance program. At the end, in this delayed memory, they were able to recall 2.5 more items from that story. When this study was going on was around the time that my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And what was fascinating from a personal perspective was that my dad was extremely social. And I have family around the country, and he would call people, my brothers and sisters in different states, a lot. And they would talk all the time. Thankfully, I was in Chicago for most of the time at this time, so I could see him. I didn't have to talk to him over the phone. But over time, his phone calls started becoming shorter and shorter with my siblings. He said, well, I'm sure this is part of what's going on. This data helped me to understand my own personal situation. If you think about this, a telephone conversation is constant hearing what the other person is saying and responding to it, immediate and delayed, right? You might have to remember back to what somebody said 10 minutes prior. And if you can't do that very well, it's embarrassing, it's frustrating, it gives you anxiety. So you might shorten those conversations because your immediate and delayed recall of what the people said to you is not there. So the dance program did have an influence on memory. Dr. Susie Aguinaga, who's a former PhD student and now is faculty at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. When she was a PhD student, she did the dance program in older Latinos who already had mild cognitive impairment. So we had a strong collaboration with Casa Central, and they have an adult wellness center. The really cool thing about how things in life come back, my grandma, Mama Rita, lived at Casa Central, and that's actually, she lived there for a couple years before she ended up passing away in 1997. Then here, about 15 plus years later, I'm back at Casa Central, but doing research with Susie. So for this, we had people who already had mild cognitive impairment. So it was a mini mental score within that range. So this was a smaller study, right? We had a dance group and we had a waitlist control group. This time we didn't have health education. We found over time that modifications were needed. We can't just say, here's a program, if you can't do it, oh well, sorry about your luck. The people had mild cognitive impairment, and actually some of them, we went pretty low with an MMSE score. They probably had some of them had some level of dementia. A research staff person had to go around to the different rooms of the center and remind people whenever class was happening. I think it was Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m., but the people didn't remember it. Our Miguel, the instructor, he used a DJ app to slow down the pace of the music because the regular pace was too fast for them to keep up with. We removed some of the dance turns for safety reasons. So anything where a person had to do a complete spin, we removed that because we found that people didn't feel comfortable doing that. So we simplified the program a bit. We added in more repetition, and we had to make modifications if they felt pain. There's a lot of data here. Who were these people? I've highlighted a few here. On average, 75 years old with multiple comorbidities. I mean, the 75-year-old Latinos in Chicago, there's a long history of what the people have gone through. And so there was, a lot of health issues. So we had to modify the program for specific people. Annual income, over half had an annual income self-reported of less than $10,000 per year, and on average, 6 years of formal education. I love that our team worked hard to provide a program and that the people were willing to participate in this study. Spanish-speaking, 75-year-old Latinos who on average have 6 years of education are not your typical research participants. But we created an environment such that people wanted to participate in our research and do the dance program. And if you look at the data, this was the logical memory, baseline 4 months and 8 months. Dance is in this like turquoise line, and the waitlist control group was in this line. Over the course of 4 months, you saw that those in the dance group were able to remember 2 more items from that test. Those in the control group over this 8 months actually decreased by about a point and a half. So it's a moderate interaction effect size. From the data, granted, this is a small study. This was with an N of 20. We have not done this on a larger scale yet. Hopefully we will be able to, but gives some research support for moving our bodies in a way that we like to do, that we can keep doing, that can have an impact on our cognition. From this smaller data, we were able to get funding from the NIH, a large randomized controlled trial that was called BILA. Here was our study logo, was really cool. This was designed, we did a competition with Chicago high school students. And so you see the dancing, the outline of the brain. We had a health education group, there's music, and the skyline of Chicago. So in this BILA study, we found across 333 older Latinos randomized to the experimental dance group or the health education control group that it did increase physical activity over the 4-month program, more in the dance group than in the health education group. We also added in with this study, because it was bigger, larger, more funding, a maintenance program. And in this, it was a train the trainer model for sustainability. So we trained a couple people from each of the site to be a peer dance instructor over this maintenance 4-month period. Those in the health education group didn't get any kind of program over this time. So you can see they decreased a bit in their physical activity, but those in the dance group actually did maintain their physical activity. Now, we didn't collect data beyond this point, so we don't know what happened here. We were at 12 centers in the Chicago area. About 5 of them continued it beyond the study. We know from qualitative data, but we don't know how the physical activity of the individuals changed. As you can tell, I'm very proud of the work that my lab and I have done. However, we learned a ton from things that we didn't know. So I had a number of older Latinos in this study that ended up dropping out of the program, who ended up not coming for the duration of the initial program or the duration of the maintenance program. Dr. Konopak and I did randomized control trial work with Dr. Eddie McCauley at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and he's a co-investigator on this study. And I talked to him about, I don't know what to do. So many people are, dropping out of the study. And then he would give me ideas. And the ideas, I say, yep, I tried that. Yep, we did that. It didn't result in any positive improvements. No. At some point, he said, I don't know what to tell you. Those are all my ideas. Write a paper about it. So I said, that's a great idea. That's why you continue to be a mentor for me. So I talked to other investigators at UIC, and we found in our research with older Latinos, we were all having the same issues. So here you can see it. We published a paper about it, like Lessons Learned. It's the paper I'm most proud of all of my publications, because it is practically helpful to people doing the research. We had people where their work status changed. We know that older Latinos work later into life than older non-Latino whites. So somebody didn't have a job when they started the trial, and then they ended up getting a job. Or many of them were working hourly shift jobs. Their shift was changed on them. Oh, we don't need you to come in anymore from 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. Now we need you from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. So they were able to attend the class, and then it turns out they were not able to attend the class anymore. I mentioned those comorbidities. There are high levels of chronic disease amongst Latinos. So there were health issues. People didn't feel well, didn't come to class, had doctor's appointments. We know that in general, older adults tend to have more doctor's appointments than middle-aged and younger, but this was even exacerbated amongst older Latinos. The one that Dr. McCauley never came across, we had a number of people who would come to us and say, I'm not going to be able to come to your program anymore because my fill-in-the-blank family member, my sister in Mexico, is sick, and so I need to go, be with her and help take care of her. And we'd say, I'm so sorry to hear that. You're welcome to come back to the dance classes when you return. Do you know when you're coming back? And typically a response was, no, it's a one-way ticket, and I'll come back when I'm able. And we never had anybody leave, and then come back into the dance program for different reasons. And the other one, I know people lost interest. I know it has to be that people got bored, they didn't like it, but nobody told us a reason for dropping out was because they didn't like the program. And these are all in red. Maybe some of them should be in this color because I view them as either cultural roots or circumstantial roots, right? We talked about familismo and caring for others and having to go out of state. We talked about personalismo and respeto, that respect that you try to keep things steady, you know, like don't rock the boat, don't say things that are going to straight up, you know, hurt somebody's feelings or make them feel bad. So all of these things we found, and we wrote a paper. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through this, but here is the citation with the DOI. So if you're interested, so we did, what are recruitment challenges that we had? And what are some strategies that you might want to include in your own research? Lack of trust of researchers, working late into life, lower literacy levels, and we included retention challenges that we had and some potential strategies that you might want to include in your research of your own, like when people travel back to their home of a different country. Spanish speaking, do you want to have it in English and Spanish, and considerations, and caregiving, which is highly prevalent amongst older Latinos. I'm going to close by talking about another study. Dr. Konopak mentioned that I do work with the Rush Alzheimer's Disease Center. I lead the Latino Core of their center. This is another symbol or logo that was done through a competition of high school students. You can see the brain, but it's also meant to be like a tree and with the roots. And you'll see why that is important in a minute. So we have a Latino core. We know that in general, Latinos do not donate their brains to science. Currently, the only way that we know if somebody truly had Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia is from the autopsies. There's almost no data on the brains of Latinos, and from what we have is more those of Caribbean descent and not as much Mexican and other. So it's a prospective study. We recruit Latinos who are 60 and older. We really try to shoot for 65 and older. They do not have dementia. They do not have a diagnosis of dementia. They have to be willing to do annual testing with us and to consider donating their brains when they pass away, but that's not a requirement. So to date, we have 249 people enrolled in our study, and of those, 73 have signed the Anatomical Gift Act, meaning that when they pass, they will donate their brains and other things like spinal cord and that type of thing. Why would people donate to science? Why do Latinos donate to science? I highlight these in red because these cultural values are coming up once again. Many Latinos have had a family member or a close friend who's like family have Alzheimer's disease, and they have seen how terrible a disease it is. And the people say, I want to do something about that. The second one, that familismo, right? You saw the logo with the brain, which is also a tree with roots. They're the roots of their families, right? I want to help so that my kids and my grandkids and future generations of my family do not have to deal with Alzheimer's disease. So you see this family-centered part of why people are agreeing to donate. And you see an altruistic, I want to help people understand why people get Alzheimer's disease, why others don't, and specifically, are there differences? Are there different reasons why Latinos might be getting Alzheimer's disease than other segments of the population? So in summary, We do know that Latinos are a large portion of the older adult population and growing. Unfortunately, many Latinos have poor health profiles, and these cultural values and belief are just a part of people's lives, all aspects of life, and I believe must be considered in working with individuals, in working, it's not groups of people necessarily, it's individuals in practice, like you as a provider, and in research, because they help us describe, explain, and sometimes predict what's going to happen with an individual. So I would like to acknowledge those who are working closely with me right now, 2 PhD students, Michelle and Miguel, and also Juan, who's an undergraduate and is part of Las Ganas, which is a Hispanic Serving Institution program as a research fellow that we have at UIC. They are supportive, they are phenomenal individuals, people, and also scholars. And I would acknowledge sources of funding, but also all of the participants who have participated in the study that have trusted us with themselves and with their data, and also especially all of the student research assistants that have contributed to this work over the years. So a sincere thank you for allowing me to take part of your day to talk to you about my lab's work. And I'm open to questions. I think we have some time for questions.
Yes, we do have time for questions. There was nothing in the chat. I think people were very engaged. Oh, let's see. I think you have one already.
Juliana, should I leave my slides up or should I stop sharing?
No, let's take your slides down. That way people can focus on you.
Okay.
So let's see. Struck by your work, can you share the future directions of your research? What are you thinking about in light of your future projections of Latinos with Alzheimer's?
Yes. So that's a timely question for me because I have a grant proposal that's to the CDC that's due 1 week from today. And we are making the dance program as a remote or virtual dance program. So I mentioned Dr. Aguinaga earlier. She has funding where she is converting it to a virtual program. And so what's really cool is that she has written a letter of support for my grant, saying that she will share her materials and in what she learns from doing this virtually. I always thought about that, COVID has required us to adapt and find new ways of doing things. And this is one way that potentially could have greater reach. People had trouble, I didn't highlight transportation, but people had trouble getting to a senior center or a community center 2 times per week over time. Climate sometimes and many reasons. So the thought is if people can do this in their homes, then maybe that will be easier. The issue is the divide, right? Between, do people have access to things like a tablet, a laptop, a desktop, a webcam, right? And will they have access to these things? So for the grant, we're going to provide for those who don't. But we focus on physical activity because there in the Alzheimer's world, there really is a huge focus on what can we do to reduce our risk, right? So the preventative on that front end. And we know physical activity, amongst other things, right, like diet and cognitive activity and social activity. But physical activity really is something that we can really target to try to change, to try to improve somebody's health profile. So that's what we're doing now, trying to extend that the reach of the dance program. The other thing that I would say is the Latino Core I am so fortunate to be the leader of the Latino Core because I helped establish it, and now it's a core for other people to do research, right? So a colleague of mine, Dr. Melissa Lamar, added in MRI testing, magnetic resonance imaging, to try to see what's going on in the brains of Latinos. So we do education first to make sure people know what it is and what they might be volunteering for. But that's really important too, because then it's a source of people that people with their amazingly brilliant brains can come up with these Alzheimer's related research questions and we can learn. One of the things I don't like doing, but I do as a scientist, is to talk about people as like a source of data or like, the acquiring the brains of people. Please know that where I'm coming from in my heart is that it's more than just that, right? It's an individual, it's somebody's father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, etc. So I feel that as a scientist, without those things, which are data, we wouldn't be able to learn. So please know that's where I'm coming from in talking about the things in that way.
You. I am mindful of the time and realize that it is 1:01 and some people are needing to drop off. They have other meetings. But if there's one more question, I believe David is willing to address one more. Let's see. I have another one. All right, let's see. Okay. Kara, yours is a lot. You go ahead and do yours yourself. If you want to unmute.
Thank you. I actually don't have a specific question, but just wanted to thank you so much for a very informative talk and being such a great example of culturally appropriate patient-centered care. So inspiring, I can get back to clinical practice as a PA. And we're taking PA students to Guatemala this summer on a mission trip, and I'm going to ask them to listen to this before we go because everything you've said is so important. Just thank you so much.
Yeah, that's great. I would actually be interested in follow-up, right? In terms of like what did they hear that after their experience like resonated, right? They're like, oh, he said this and we saw this, like that matches. But maybe more importantly, oh, he said this, but that's not what we saw, right? Or, oh, I think he's missing out on this really important part of culture that he hasn't even considered in his research, right? So if you'd be willing in the future to follow back up, I'd really be interested in learning about that.
Sure, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anyone else? Going once, going twice? Just want to unmute yourself.
I just want to say thank you on behalf of all of us. That was fascinating. I know I learned an awful lot, and I'm glad we recorded this because I think a lot of folks are going to want to listen to this, maybe even again. We'll be sure to follow up with you. I know this group that's going down to Guatemala will be very cognizant of a lot of the cultural issues that you mentioned, and it would be interesting to get follow-up. You should go down there with them.
Hey, let me know.
I was
Thank you,
thinking
Dr.
the same
Middleman.
thing,
Appreciate that.
so.
Take care.
Thank you everyone for coming, but most importantly, let's thank our guest speaker, Dr. David Marquez. I mean, I know we're online, but clapping, whatever.
Appreciate it.
Know how to use the feature on screen. You shared so much in terms of wealth of knowledge, also in your personal experience, and then of course your research. And so I think even for me, I was really excited to see all of the cultural inclusion and nuances that you brought to light, because they are things that we all have to think about with our patients, but then also even with each other, right?
Yeah,
As we're thinking
right,
about
right.
who we work with, our coworkers and things of that nature. And so I am so grateful for the opportunity to have met you and for us to have connected through this means and this forum. So just know that you forever have a friend in Solace University. And I look forward to seeing you in Chi-Town. My mom is from Gary, Indiana. So,
Yeah, that's right.
we might have to hook up.
Excellent. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you so much. And very quickly, everyone, our next event is March 2nd. Nydia Hahn from 6 ABC News. She will do her talk on This is America, which touches on racism and how we treat each other in America. So I hope that you'll be back for that. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. See you at SBN, Dave. Bye.
Okay. See you, Jim.